Squid Game, anti-capitalist, or anti-authoritarian?
Mr. Reagan.
Now, you've heard of inflation. You've probably heard of stagflation, but have you heard of shrinkflation? Yeah, shrinkflation. That is actually a thing. Now, this is where your candy bar or your burger or your orange juice gets smaller, but the price stays the same. It's sometimes difficult to notice these things because the packaging often remains the same size. But this happens all the time. It's happening everywhere right now. But the government insists that inflation is under control and that it's just temporary. But what do you think? Do you trust that this administration has anything under control? Exactly. But you know what? Noble Gold is ahead of the game here. They know that with a precious metals IRA, you can hedge against these rising prices so that you can retire without worrying about it. You'll keep up with the inflation that the folks in Washington are trying to pretend doesn't exist. And this month, to thank you and to get your precious metals project off to a flying start, Noble Gold is giving away this 5-ounce solid silver America the Beautiful bullion coin with every qualifying IRA and 401 rollover. This one is the Idaho Wilderness. Fantastic company. And in fact, somebody wrote in the comments the other day, they wrote, your Noble Gold advertisements are great. I invested with them, and he's very happy. So that's great. And if you want to invest too, go to noblegoldinvestments.com or call them at 877-646-5347. That's 877-646-5347. So this is another episode that's really about the fact that leftists are just idiots. Seriously, morons. And I don't mean just your average low-information Democrat voter. There are tons of very smart Democrat voters that just don't expose themselves to the news that much. And they believe whatever they happen to see on CNN, and they just vote Democrat because Trump supporters are rednecks or whatever. Now, I'm talking about people who educate themselves about politics, educate themselves about history, and for whatever reason become these hyper-aggressive, psychopathic, far-left activists. And these people are posting on Twitter like crazy right now because there is a new show out of Korea called Squid Game.
게임을 거부하는 참가자는 탈락 후 처리된다.
If you haven't heard of it, get out from under your rock and turn on Netflix. If you don't have Netflix, find somebody who does, because Squid Game is excellent. Now, if you don't like gore and blood and people getting shot in the head, do not watch this show. This is a pretty gory, pretty vicious show, but the story is excellent, and the characters are excellent, and the cinematography is excellent, and everything about it is excellent, except for the Americans that they bring at the end. Those actors are terrible. I don't know if that was the directing or what, but super cringe. But the rest of the show, all the Korean actors, it's fantastic. Fantastic show, fantastic story, great twists, just amazing. You'll tear up, you'll be thrilled in certain instances. I mean, it's just a great show. It's just a great roller coaster. Now, what's the story of this show? Essentially, the idea behind the show is that there is a group of rich elites that provide a bunch of poor people from Korea an opportunity to win a ton of money. They have to go to an island, and then they play these children's games, and as they play these children's games, some people get eliminated with each passing game, and by the end, one person wins the total pot of money. And as each person gets eliminated, the amount of money that's assigned to them drops into a big piggy bank, and they collect all the money at the end. There's only one winner, and that winner collects everything. But the catch is that when you're eliminated from the game, you're literally executed. You're murdered. This is a common trope with these kinds of movies and shows where, rich elites have fun by watching poor people get killed. I don't know why people think that this is a believable trope that we need to put into fiction, in all these different shows and movies and stuff. But it's something that people think rich people want to see people killed. I don't know. I guess it comes from the concept of the Roman Colosseum, right? Where this kind of thing did happen. But that wasn't just rich people. That was like everybody watching the gladiators. Anyway, I digress. But anyway, a lot of leftists have watched this show and they have become exuberant with the idea that this TV show is a critique of capitalism. And you know what? Let's look at some of the headlines that have been written by the leftist media about the show. All right, this headline says, fans believe Netflix's Squid Game could cause an anti-capitalist revolution. That's a little optimistic of them. All right, let's see here. Squid Game and the rise of anti-capitalist entertainment. Squid Game's scathing critique of capitalism. This one says, series review, Squid Game's a brutal anti-capitalist critique wrapped in a bloody entertaining package. This is from BuzzFeed, of course. They write, Squid Game works because capitalism is a global scourge. This headline from a socialist blog called the 1919 Review is entitled, "Squid Game, like capitalism, is equal and voluntary, in theory." So as you can see, the leftists are losing their minds, thrilled that the world is getting this anti-capitalist propaganda. But is it anti-capitalist propaganda? Why are they so sure that this is an anti-capitalist show? There are a few reasons why one could draw those parallels between this show and capitalism. Primarily, it's this idea of extreme competition, right? The idea of capitalism, we all compete in the marketplace for the best product, the best service, the best company, all that stuff. And whoever has the best product, best service at the lowest price wins. Therefore, capitalism is competitive. You get hierarchies. That's not fair. Forget the fact that it actually is fair, because it's not always fair, but it's as fair as is possible, because you throw out companies that produce bad products, produce bad services, or overcharge their customers. Of course, that doesn't always happen perfectly, but that's the general idea behind capitalism. It works pretty well. Not only this, but in the film, there are people who in the real world are pretty destitute characters. In fact, all of the characters are relatively poor in desperate situations where they desperately need help of some kind. Financially, especially, having a bit of money is going to help them get out of their current situations. However, the problem with saying that this is a capitalist critique is that all of the characters, they're all really shady people. They're characters who aren't just unlucky in life. They're characters who have made genuinely poor decisions about what they're going to do. I mean, there's two characters that seem blameless, the Indian guy and the old man. Both of these characters, never see them do anything wrong. They appear to be genuinely good people. I think the old man is in bad health, and so he's like, well, I'm going to die anyway. But the Indian, he just seems like he was actually unlucky. He was actually screwed by his employer. Money was stolen from him, so he's in a pretty bad situation by pure luck, which does happen in capitalist societies. But all the rest of the characters, like the main character is a gambler, and he steals from his mother and gambles the money that he steals from his mother away. And this is the character that's in the game, and this is the character we're supposed to root for. I mean, I can understand that capitalism doesn't appear to be the best system sometimes, because you do get these people who are poor and in bad situations. But a lot of the time, people who are poor or destitute in America or in a capitalist country, it is sometimes because they have made really bad life choices. They've become addicted to drugs, or they've decided to commit crimes or something like that. I actually think this is portrayed pretty reasonably, pretty accurately in the show. So I don't know how sympathetic people are of these characters when they first see them. I mean, after a while, what they do is they use the old man and they use the Indian guy as characters by which we can then see how good or bad the other characters are, right? So they're the sort of pure characters, and how other characters treat the old man, how other characters treat the Indian guy, that's how we see how good or bad the various characters in the rest of the show are. And so then you become sympathetic to some people and you start to hate others. And it's a very brilliant way of doing that. And also, most of the characters are people that you've met before. I mean, there's one character is this crazy woman. She's super annoying. I have a friend who watched the show and he was like, I could not get over this one. I hated this woman. I'm like, yeah, but you've met a woman like that before, haven't you? And he's like, oh yeah, I've met people like that. I'm like, and that's the genius of this show. A lot of these characters are so beautifully written. I mean, really brilliantly written, because they are people, even though they're Korean, they're people that we've all met. We've all met the cute chick on the show. We've all met the main character who's a little irresponsible. We've all met the bully in the show. We've met all of these characters. We've met scumbags and we've met good people. I mean, I'm 42, so I've met all these kind of people in my life. I mean, depending on how old or young you are, maybe you haven't experienced all the different varieties of types of great people and horrible people in the world, but there's a lot of horrible people, but there's also a lot of great people too. And this show really explores those ideas really brilliantly. But just because poor people exist in the world, and just because circumstances aren't perfect for everyone, that doesn't mean capitalism is a terrible thing. And I don't necessarily think that it was the outside world that, if you were going to draw a parallel between capitalism and the characters on this show and what they go through, it probably wouldn't actually be what happens outside the game in the real world, supposedly, but rather what happens in the game. Actually, in the game is supposed to be like a parallel to capitalism, according to these people. And that's really a stretch. But let's go along with it. It is some kind of a metaphor of capitalism, because there is, in particular, a line in the film in which one of the primary villains states that, quote, as people who have suffered from inequality and discrimination in the outside world, we are giving them one last chance to fight and win on an equal footing. Now, having said that in the film, having that line expressed in the film, this is really the primary reason why people are like, oh, this is a metaphor for capitalism, because this is exactly what capitalism is supposed to do, right? We're supposed to put everyone on an equal footing in the sense that everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed in America. But it's not exactly right, because capitalism doesn't insist that everybody start from an equal spot. Capitalism just says we're not stopping anybody from starting a business. We're not stopping anybody from, if they have a really great service or really great product, from succeeding over somebody else, right? This is in part part why you have anti-monopoly, antitrust laws and stuff like that to help regulate the system so that everybody has a chance. This is the regulation of the government that we appreciate. If you're a libertarian, you might think, well, that's no good, actually. You should be able to have very dominant companies and stuff like that, and all that's just fine. It'll work itself out over time, and probably true. But at the end of the day, we do want everybody to be able to succeed. That's the kind of concept of the kind of capitalism that we have in America. But starting out from an equal footing, that's actually not really a good analogy, because people don't start out from an equal footing. People are different, and people do have different skills and abilities, and some people succeed more than others, and that's what capitalism is supposed to be. And actually in the show, even though the character says that everybody starts with an equal footing, no, that's really not true, because a lot of the games are physical and you have women and stuff like that, and they can't compete as well. And the show actually depicts that very well. And in that way, I would actually say that this show is more conservative, really. It's kind of anti-leftist. The left says we're all blank slates, right? We all start out the same, and then society changes us, right? So if you're born a woman, you're not born physically weaker than a man, but rather you are trained to be petite and, delightful and not to use physical strength, and therefore you're not as physically strong as a man because you're taught not to be. This is the really crazy leftist. And it's like, well, no, that's not true, actually. There is some biology there that makes women physically weaker typically than men. And so recognizing that is sometimes difficult for Hollywood. Hollywood doesn't want to recognize that men are physically stronger than women. And so they make women the badasses beating people up, and then they make these white guys, these dopey idiots who can't make good decisions and can't think through things. Women are just always smarter, physically stronger, better with a gun, everything, right, in Hollywood. But in this Korean show, they don't do that. They depict the characters sort of like how they would probably be in real life. And I do think that's the key to why this show is actually so successful. But one reviewer writes, the game's overseer keeps insisting on equality as the fundamental principle of the whole operation. In theory, capitalism is fair and we're all equal. Less true than the equal footing comment, right? Equal footing suggests that people start out from an equal place, which is not true in capitalism. But this says, in theory, capitalism is fair and we're all equal. Well, in theory, capitalism is fair, that's true, but we're all equal. I mean, neither of these things are true, but the idea that we're all equal, I mean, that's really not true. That's basically the whole point of capitalism, is that we all compete and the best people win, right? Capitalism is meant to create hierarchies, or at least meant to facilitate them. It's a hierarchy. Jordan Peterson discussed this a lot. Hierarchies are not something that should be disdained or hated, right? The left tends to disdain and hate hierarchies. Why? Because it indicates that some people are potentially better than others in some ways. And they hate that, right? They think that's totally unfair and horrible and gross and all those things. But it's not unfair. It's not horrible. It's not gross. Like, you wouldn't expect somebody who's a brilliant physicist to then be able to compete in some kind of like swimming event and then also be the best swimmer in the world. I mean, maybe they might. That would be great. That'd be amazing, right? But we kind of expect that somebody who is an amazing swimmer and the best in the world potentially isn't probably going to also be the most brilliant physicist in the world. And the most brilliant physicist in the world, we're not expect is going to be the best at anything else, right? So there are people who are amazing at certain disciplines, and they go into those disciplines and they become the best at it. And there's people who are the third best and the fourth best and the fifth best and the 100th best, but they're all physicists. They're all doing great work and helping the world. And there's the 1 to 100 best swimmers, but they're all professional athletes. Well, probably not swimming, but basketball players and football players and whatnot. The best professional athletes, they're all professionals. They're all sponsored by Nike or whomever, and they're all making a ton of money because they are revered for what they do. And we all should be able to find something that we're good enough at, or that we love enough that we can do and we can be respected for, and we can make a good living doing it. And that's the beauty of capitalism. You find your own way, and we recognize that people are unequal and all different, but we give them the opportunity to succeed in whichever way they can. Now, some people are always going to succeed more than others, and that's actually a good thing, because when you have people who are at the top of the hierarchy, the people at the bottom of the hierarchy might say, ooh, I want to live that lifestyle, or I respect that person, I want to be more like him, and they might work their way around to become higher up on the hierarchy, which is a good thing. Hierarchies benefit the world. When you present the world with the equal outcome concept of communism, it quashes all of that competitiveness and that desire to achieve something, and it destroys the hierarchies. And we're going to get into the problems with that in a moment, but I would like to say that there is one other argument that supports the idea that this show is some kind of an analogy or some kind of critique of capitalism. And that is something that the writer-director said to Variety. And he said, I wanted to write a story that was an allegory or a fable about modern capitalist society, something that depicts an extreme competition, something like the extreme competition of life. But I wanted it to use the kind of characters we've all met in real life. And you know what? That's actually fine. I actually welcome criticisms of capitalism. I don't think that a criticism of capitalism is a bad thing. But here's the thing. Leftists tend to conflate the idea of critiquing modern capitalism or capitalism as it is practiced in America or Korea or wherever. They tend to conflate that with a promotion of communism. And a critique of capitalism is not the same thing as a promotion of communism. And I don't think that this guy's promoting communism, which is a lot of these reporters, so-called, seem to think. And I'll explain all of that in a minute. But first, I want to break down a couple of other ideas here. Now, like I said, this film is about hierarchies and competition, and that's something that, like I said, Jordan Peterson has talked a lot about and revealed to many people who didn't realize it before that hierarchies are not actually a terrible thing, but it is something that people don't like. They think it's ugly. And I'm not sure that the writer-director understood what he was doing when he produced this in terms of what's the best analogy to draw when talking about, how this show represents humanity. He said, it's a critique of capitalism. That might have been something that he was encouraged to say by the reporter at Variety. I don't know. But maybe that really is what he was trying to do. But the truth is, this is not an anti-capitalist show. I mean, the metaphor breaks down very, very easily. It's not really a critique of capitalism in any conceivable way. This is a show that critiques the hyper-competitive nature of the world. People are just hyper-competitive naturally. And the show kind of critiques that. It critiques greed. It critiques crazy rich people. There's all kinds of things that you could critique, that you could see very obviously are critiqued by this show. But capitalism, people on Twitter are like, oh, it's so funny that all these people are watching this show. They don't even realize it's a critique of capitalism. Like these guys are like super smart or something. I'm like, well, it's not obvious because it's not a very good critique of, if it's a critique of capitalism, it's a terrible critique of capitalism. So yeah, people aren't going to get it because it's such a bad critique of capitalism that it doesn't work. The critique doesn't work because the metaphor doesn't work. The analogy breaks down. And so of course people aren't going to get it because it's a terrible, terrible metaphor. It doesn't work. It's not a good critique. Nevertheless, even if it were a critique of capitalism, no matter what the writer-director says, it's not really, if it is, it's not a good one. But okay, let's say it is. Okay, fine. Again, critiquing capitalism is not the same thing as saying capitalism is bad and we should replace it with communism, right? But that is how radical leftists perceive any criticism of capitalism or any criticism of competition or any criticism of hierarchies. As soon as they see a criticism, they go, aha, weakness. We're going to instill communism instead. Burn it all to the ground. There's flaws in all these things. Capitalism isn't exactly perfect all the time, and therefore we got to burn the whole thing to the ground and rebuild communist society in its place. No, I don't think that's what the writer-director is saying. I think these people are crazy. Most of these people are crazy. Look, the reality is that hyper-competitive nature of the world, which is, I would say, what you may draw as a critique from this show. That nature, that is the very mechanism that has caused humanity to thrive and to develop all the amazing products and services that you use every day. If you were to look at this show and you were to try to take criticisms away from it that are good criticisms, I would say that it criticizes class systems, it criticizes greed, it criticizes, I think most importantly, authoritarianism. I think that is the primary takeaway from this show. I actually think it's a great show to look and to think, wow, this could be America in a few years under the Biden administration. But look, in defense of the people who think that this is a communist or, a capitalist, anti-capitalist, pro-communist thing, which it isn't, but in their defense, there are industries in America that, and I think probably also in South Korea, that are corrupt and they are cruel and they are authoritarian despite existing within capitalist framework. Let me read a quote from the writer-director, a different quote. He says, outwardly, Korean entertainment seems to be doing very well, the entertainment industry in South Korea. He says, think of BTS. Think of the movie Parasite or the Gangnam Style music video or Crash Landing. I don't know what Crash Landing is. But South Korean society, he says, is also very competitive and very stressful. And he says some of that stress is carried over in the way that we are always preparing for the next crisis. In some ways, it's a motivator. It helps us ask what should be done. But such competition also has side effects, he says, right? So he's saying that this extreme competition in the capitalist system that they have in South Korea can be very stressful and all that kind of stuff, which is definitely true. Trying to make a better life for yourself can be stressful. But imagine trying to do that and there's no possibility of improving your life. That would be far more stressful, I would say. At least having the option means that the stressful, motivation that you have can actually bear fruit and be effective. But I digress. The point I'm trying to make here is that he's specifically talking about the entertainment industry in South Korea. And I've worked in the entertainment industry here in Los Angeles and Hollywood. There is something to be said about, how competitive it is out here and how vicious, right? And when you have an industry, I actually kind of agree with this. I've often likened Hollywood to a third world country. Hollywood actually preys on the dreams of aspiring actors, aspiring writers, aspiring directors. The town, promises great success if you exhibit great talent. The problem with that is it doesn't actually work that way. Many of the most talented people I've ever met, in Hollywood, they've never been given a shot to be successful because it's not necessarily talented people who get work in Hollywood. It's simply those who are favored by the ruling class, right? This town runs on nepotism and virtue signaling. You see, Hollywood makes a lot of money, and there are a very limited number of employment opportunities within the industry, and there are a ton of people who want to have these jobs, and so this provides those who are able to grant those jobs a massive amount of power, and this is what creates situations like the casting couch. It creates monsters like Harvey Weinstein. It allows Hollywood leftists to discriminate in extremely bigoted ways against white people or men, and of course, against conservatives. And I think that this power structure probably exists in the same way in South Korea, in their entertainment industry. And this happens because the industry in which Hwang Dong-hyuk, which is the name of the writer-director, this happens to be the industry in which this guy worked his entire adult life. And so I can accept that this TV show, Squid Game, is actually a critique of capitalism. Would be capitalism distorted and twisted by the ideological left. The truth is that capitalism is vulnerable to exploitation by bad people. However, even when it's exploited by bad people, it's still the best economic system. Consider YouTube. YouTube is run by an evil dictator called Susan Wojcicki. Susan Wojcicki is a tyrant who runs a multi-billion-dollar company that actively suppresses political speech and perverts the democratic system in America. This company crushes me. Susan Wojcicki's estimated net worth is over $400 million, and yet she runs a company that has actively suppressed the reach of my political messages. I'm a regular guy. I'm not rich. I don't even have 1/10,000th of the money that Susan Wojcicki has, and yet she thinks that it's fun to crush people like me. And yet, even a corrupt company like YouTube run by a corrupt tyrant like Susan Wojcicki, still within that corrupt company, I can still make a living. I still have an audience big enough that sponsors are willing to pay me to advertise their products, and so I can pay my rent and I can pay for food and stuff like that. And a lot of people have suggested that I switch to Rumble out of principle against YouTube or something. And those people do not know what the hell they're talking about. I've used Rumble, and maybe I get a few hundred views per video. That platform is terrible. If I left YouTube, I'd not reach anywhere near the same number of people, and I'd be broke because Rumble doesn't pay anything. I've actually tried to monetize videos on Rumble, and it just says 0, 0, 0 constantly, every single day, forever and ever and ever. I don't know what the deal is with Rumble's payment system, but it's crap. It doesn't work. Nothing on Rumble works. Rumble's just a joke of a platform. I only use it for the videos I literally cannot get on YouTube, but otherwise it's a terrible, terrible company. I'm not saying the people who run it are terrible. I'm just saying they need to fix their stupid website. And anyway, even if I left, what principle would I be upholding? The principle that YouTube is an evil company with bad values? Yeah, well, you know what? In this case, actions actually are a lot quieter than words, because if I leave YouTube, there's going to be a far smaller audience that hears me when I say that YouTube is an evil company with bad values. So honestly, the people who are out there telling me to switch over to Rumble, enough. You have no idea what you're talking about. Of course, I've tried Rumble. It's terrible, but I digress. It's always good to criticize the fans of your show. But honestly, it is annoying. Look, in conclusion, I would like to propose a final question. Is Hwang Dong-hyuk, the writer-director, is he criticizing capitalism with Squid Game? Maybe. But it's not anti-capitalist, and it's certainly not pro-communist. But I mean, maybe that was what he was going for. I don't think it was, but maybe. But if so, as I said, Squid Game is an incredibly unconvincing critique, and be partly because Hwang Dong-hyuk has significantly benefited from capitalism himself. In one interview, the director said, "I was raised by a single mother in a financially troubled environment in a slum in South Korea." So this guy who wrote this so-called critique of capitalism was born and raised in poverty in a slum in South South Korea, and went on to create a show which is speculated to become the most watched show in the history of Netflix. Now he's a multi-millionaire, and all of this within an entirely capitalist system. The cameras used to produce the show, the TVs, the computers, the iPhones that are used to watch it, the distribution, the marketing, the internet itself, all of these things were made possible through capitalism. Capitalism made this man rich. And it made him rich, apparently, by criticizing capitalism. It's a beautiful irony. All right, well, that's it for me. And remember, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant. It's just they know so much that is not so. Good night.
You know, someone very profoundly once said that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism. And what is fascism? Fascism is private ownership, but total government control and regulation. Well, isn't this the liberal philosophy? The conservative, so-called, is the one that says less government. Get off my back. Get out of my pocket. And let me have more control of my own destiny.